What you're currently watching is gameplay of Alex Kidd in Miracle World, a platformer published by Sega for their very own console, the Master System. It was released in Japan on November 1st, 1986, with a Western release soon to follow in December for the US, and then a year later for Europe. As a kid growing up in the 90s, I had the Sega Genesis, and thanks to the Master System adapter stacked on, I was able to have access to some of Sega's older library. While I played Alex Kidd, I never once imagined in my lifetime that not only would I revisit it decades later, but play it inside of a different game by the name of Lost Judgments during the year 2022. It goes to show that as much as games evolve in its tech, mechanics and graphic fidelity, nothing beats the comforting feeling of playing a good old-fashioned platformer. And while I had a good time playing Alex Kidd, he was easily overshadowed by his younger cousin, Sonic the Hedgehog. After all, I was in the era of the mascot platformer. Mario, Kirby, Mega Man, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Gags? For some reason, I remember being enamored by the game Zool, where you followed a gremlin ninja thing as you leapt and spun around a diabetic's worst nightmare. Honestly, I have no idea why I was so into it as a kid. Looking at it now, it just looks so bonkers. But much like Alex Kidd, Zool fell to the sands of time while other mascots continued to prosper. It's never stopped people from trying, of course. You're bound to see another attempt at launching a game with a brand new lovable mascot. In this instance, we're taking a look at a heavily anticipated platformer by a then well-respected game developer. One that took longer to make than expected, with delays and drama holding it back. With a mascot that had promise of launching a brand new franchise that didn't really get past its first game. That's right, I'm talking about mighty Action X. An excellent little platformer for a gaming console that even the Stadium managed to outlast. A game that I think deserves some recognition with some very interesting baggage attached to it. So come join me as I hammer away viruses in the world of Mighty and its deranged godlike creator. Before we continue, I'd like to thank you for clicking on this video and giving it a watch. If you enjoyed your time here, don't hesitate to give this a like and share it around. And if you're feeling particularly generous or bored, maybe both, feel free to check out the rest of my channel. I'd really appreciate it. Much like previous content, all sources I've used to make this video will be linked down below. So with that out of the way, get cozy and enjoy the show. Cheers! For us to understand how this game came about, we might as well start from the beginning. It was the 1990s, and aside from Nintendo and Sega, we've been seeing the rise of the many industry giants from Japan: Capcom, Konami, Namco. But there was one company that never really ended up in the Western sphere like the others did. That company being Genm Corp. Founded in the late 80s by then CEO Masamune Dan, Genm was also a big player when it came to retro games. Each release being as good as the previous, and while it didn't have a big name IP, gamers still held them to high regard, with Japanese children writing in fan mail by the boatload. Genm's extensive library includes the likes of Cosmic Gate, the Haggleman trilogy, and Guardia Quest. They not only refined but improved upon the genres they were working on at the time. And while Masamune was a very talented businessman, the credit for Genm's success goes to its genius game designer, Masamune's very own son, Kirito Dan. Kirito, who was still in school at the time, started off as a part-time programmer, but eventually his talents landed him the role of lead developer. From the outside, you can see a bit of nepotism going on, but if inside sources are to be believed, the two Dans didn't exactly get along. With Masamune being a ruthless businessman from the 80s, I could see him taking advantage of his son for the company's profits, especially if he's only paying him the legally appointed part-time wages. But on the outside, it looked as if Genm was on the up and up. Masamune was even in talks with Western publishers hoping to strike a deal to bring their games over worldwide. The deal, however, fell through when Kirito caught wind of the demands to change his games to appeal to a Western audience. He felt that it was an insult to his vision, and that he locked the source code so no one else could access it. Masamune, who was running a small company at the time, couldn't risk losing his all-star programmer, so he gave in. Fortunately, years later, the game did eventually come out to the West in a DS game called Retrogaming Challenge, a game based on the Japanese show Game Center CX. Then, when the year 2000 rolled around is when everything changed. Leading up to the new millennium was when the world was embroiled in the fear of the upcoming Y2K bug. System crashes, planes falling out of the air, your Tamagotchi staging a revolt, mass hysteria. Then, as the clock hits 12 AM, nothing happened, and you're right here now listening to a bloke recount the events of the year 2000. But to our prodigy game designer, Kirito was inspired. In an interview with Famitsu, he stated that the idea behind Mighty Action X started as early as 2000. He pictured a little cartoon character whose job was to fight back the virus threat. He tinkered with the concept on and off between projects until 2009, where he finally announced Genm's brand new killer IP, slated for a 2011 release window. The premise is you played Mighty, who's on the quest to fight off the dreaded Bugster virus from his city, and stop the terrible Count Salty from infecting the entire world. 2011 came, and there was an unexpected delay. Back then, Genm was caught in a bit of controversy. You see, around that time there was a virus roaming around Japanese systems that targeted and exploited security vulnerabilities. Fortunately, most companies spotted it and shut it down before it could do major harm. One company wasn't so lucky, and that company happened to be Sony. You may remember in 2011 that Sony's PlayStation Network was a victim of a massive hack where the data of 77 million customers were harvested. As it turns out, the virus that made Sony vulnerable originated from Genm's very own servers. So Masamune was forced to take responsibility. Not only did he have to step down as CEO, but eventually he was prosecuted and incarcerated for 5 years. Japan doesn't take cybercrime too lightly. Unfortunately, that's as much as the public were told. Most of the report is classified, which can only mean that this virus did a lot more damage than we're led to believe. 2chan had a ton of wild conspiracies, the most popular one being that Kirito Dan programmed the virus himself, not only as a means to knock out any competition, but to also knock his old man out of the presidential role so he can take full control of the company. I could see this theory being more plausible knowing his relationship with his father. Insider accounts say that the two of them often clashed, with Kirito citing that Masamune's business mindset is clouding his creative vision. With his dad out of the way, he is free to make whatever games he deems worthy of release. So as Kirito took the CEO seat, he assured many fans that they will spend the extra time tightening up their security while fixing a lot of the game lineup affected by this virus. Overall, having a genius game dev as the president actually did good for the company, and eventually he became a bit of a rock star in the Japanese gaming scene, often seen hanging out with fellow creatives, staying in touch with fans through blog posts, and announcing that Genm would have their very own console, the Gamer Driver, with Mighty Action X being a launch title, along with other exclusives such as Bang Bang Shooting and the long-awaited sequel to Guardia Quest, Tazzle Quest. The console was designed with portability in mind. You could attach it to your waist and play on the go. This was around a few months before the Switch came out too, so Kirito, as usual, was ahead of the curve. And much like Nintendo, Genm wasn't interested in competing with the big names just yet. They wanted a platform for fans to play their entire library. And as a sign of goodwill, the console launched with 8 of their classic games pre-installed. It was only until 5 whole years later we finally get to see the full release of Mighty Action X. There was even a release party with a special appearance of Kirito Dan himself. Fans were ecstatic and the party almost went off without a hitch. Key word here being almost. You see, there was a guy in a really cool looking Count Salty costume who was there to antagonise the kids. You know, a bit of fun PR to get everyone excited. The problem was that the guy in the costume came to work with a high fever, and because the suit wasn't properly ventilated, the heat eventually got to him. He ended up physically attacking the attendees, which fortunately security was on top of, but it doesn't end there. Because the reason he was feverish in the first place was because he happened to have a contagious strain of the flu. This is going to be a pattern, isn't it? Still, the game was released alongside the gamer driver to positive reviews. Fans were satisfied, and it did so well that eventually Nintendo struck a deal with Genm to bring Mighty Action X over to the 3DS, which Kirito personally ported himself. It was then made available on the eShop a few months later. Though, with the eShop shutting down for the 3DS, the only way to play the game now is through physical copies, which, fortunately, I happen to own an imported copy of. So let's give this game a shot and see if it was worth all the wait.
Mighty Action X!
The game opens with your standard level select. As of now, the only thing available is the tutorial, but over time you'll have access to each stage as you complete them. Since we're starting off, now's the perfect time to get into the game mechanics. Right off the bat, I can already tell how tight and responsive the controls are. Movement is as standard as you expect. You can move left or right with the D-pad, but if you want to go fast, you can use the analog stick instead. And to be honest, that's the only way to play. I can kinda see the D-pad being useful for those times where you might need to realign yourself so you can pull off some of those trickier jumps. But the controls already feel tight enough that I don't see any point in walking. If anything, you'd be missing out on a few features. Some of the easier trappings in the platformer is either making your movement slippery or your jumps too floaty, and fortunately, Mighty Action X jumps over those traps no problem. Movement is not only solid, but jumping feels responsive and it's a lot of fun bouncing off the enemies. And speaking of which, we might as well delve into the combat. With the world overrun with bugsters, Mighty will have to use everything at his disposal to fend them off. As I said earlier, you can bounce off them, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. With Mighty's Gashikon Breaker, he can swat those nasty bugs away with ease, and if you jump you can bop them in the air. A very nice touch is, depending on which side you attack from, the bugsters will fly towards that direction. It looks cool and the 3DS version takes full advantage of this. While we have our basic attacks, Mighty also comes with a few special abilities of his own. He has a spin attack that's useful if you ever get caught surrounded. You can also use this ability in mid-air to hover across large spaces and reach areas you wouldn't under normal means. It can also act as an emergency parachute in case you fall and you want to hover to a platform last minute. And then there's the Mighty Kick, which you can activate with the shoulder button. A quick and easy way to erase your foes, but it can also be used to knock down gates and smash down boxes to give you access to other areas of the level. It's really cool that these abilities are used for combat and exploration. Of course, these abilities come at a cost. When I use any of them, you may notice in the upper left corner that the counter ticks down. This is where the collectibles come in. While Mario collects coins for points and Sonic collects rings for health, Mighty collects these pellets for his powers. But wait, there's more. Aside from collecting pellets to get stronger, you'll also have a chance to run across power-ups by breaking those blocks. These are known as energy items. A majority of them are, of course, beneficial, as they provide Mighty with a slew of temporary buffs. They can refill your health, increase your speed, and even buff your strength. However, it's worth keeping an eye out because there's also a chance you'll grab an energy item that's actually a debuff. It's a bit of a dick move, but at the same time it keeps you on your guard. With all of these elements together, it makes for a really fun game. Every little mechanic is important in one way or another. I mentioned earlier that you can use these moves for exploration as well. Not only can you find different routes, but also collectible golden mighties, 3 in total per stage, excluding the final boss. Mechanically, each level has been thoughtfully well designed. The only downside being that a majority of the levels aren't aesthetically interesting. It definitely feels like they went all in on the gameplay over looks. Of course, that's not to say it looks bad or anything, it's passable and I actually quite like the cartoony art style. But unfortunately, after the first stage it becomes somewhat generic. The only things that stand out are the bugsters, blocks, macaroon jump pads, and that donut themed finish line. Actually, with the use of desserts and sweets, it's starting to remind me of... Oh my god! Unfortunately, the enemy variety takes a hit in this area too. And by that I mean, it's just one enemy but palette swapped. They kind of behave differently, sure, but it would have been nice to change things up a bit. I think the most excited I got fighting an enemy is when a rare gold bugster spawns and you have to chase it down to kill it. It's a good thing that the fight with Count Salty makes up for all of that. It's actually the first time the game puts up a challenge, and once again it makes use of all the mechanics available. If I were to complain, it would be Salty's odd hitbox. There are times where I couldn't tell where I could hit him. Most of the time I swing my hammer at an empty space in front of him, and still manage to do some damage. Other than that, it's a solid boss fight, and I really like his design. Another saving grace is its sound design. Every hit of the Gashcon breaker makes a nice impact. It feels like Mighty's signature weapon has a lot of weight behind it. The music is excellent, harkening back to the age of retro gaming with a modern twist. It's upbeat and its use of chiptunes doesn't outstay its welcome. If anything, the soundtrack in tone reminds me a lot of Mega Man Powered Up, and that's a huge compliment. If there is one major disappointment, it's that the game is extremely short. Like, 6 stages short, each being around 2 to 3 minutes long, which kinda makes you wonder why the game took so long, but with how tightly refined the mechanics are, it definitely feels like that was the area they focused on the most. However, you can take into account the aspects of replayability, each stage having 3 bonus objectives with varying degrees of difficulty. This can range from speedrunning a level, or collecting all 3 golden mighties, and that's where you'll spend most of your game time. The 3DS version not only makes use of its 3D gimmick, but the dual screen feature as well, even letting you know what energy item you have on you. But you might also notice the addition of a power gauge. This is exclusive to the portable system. As you take out each bugster, the gauge fills up, and once full, you tap it with the stylus, and Mighty does a full screen special which leads into a temporary buff. It's basically an insta-win button, and because it's on the Nintendo console, I'm not particularly surprised. When I played through this version for the video, I actually forgot about this feature and just played the game as normal. Other than that, both versions are identical. Having Kirito personally program the port definitely helps, and I wish more companies followed suit. Overall, I think this is a really cool platformer. It may have its shortcomings, but it makes up for its fully refined mechanics, and well worth checking out. There were a lot of plans to franchise Mighty, even before the game came out. According to leaked documents, there were a whole line of sequels and spin-offs for fans to enjoy. The sequel, Mighty Brothers XX, was actually going to be a co-op game. There was even plans for a third game called Maximum Mighty X, but all we have to go on is the concept art which looks like Mighty is riding a robot. there was a deal in the works with Sony to create a game for the PSVR system called Mighty Creator VRX. It was planned to be a type of sandbox game that would allow players to not only create worlds, but create their own games. There was even going to be a planned visual novel called Mighty Novel X, but again, there isn't much to go on aside from art. A month after Mighty Action X's release, Genm also started selling Mighty plushies, along with toys of his signature weapon, the Gashikon Breaker. So it definitely feels like Kirito knew that he had a hit on his hands, and decided to strike while the iron was hot. But as we were about to find out, that iron struck back. So, with the successful launch of the Gamer Driver, along with Mighty Action X, you would think that the story would end on a happier note for Genm Corp. Unfortunately, this is where things get very murky, and I'll try my best to piece together the aftermath with whatever information is available. Riding off the success, Kirito announced that Genm struck a deal with Toei and Ishimori Production Inc. to produce a game based on the cultural icon Kamenrider. This was to be Kirito's magnum opus, Kamenrider Chronicle, a competitive multiplayer game where you assume the role of a Rise player to battle your rivals and defeat monsters for a chance to become the legendary hero Kronos, of which the final boss, Game Deus, would appear and the last rider standing would have to take them on. What makes this different from other multiplayers was that this was going to be a sort of augmented reality game, taking full advantage of the Gamer Driver's portability. That's right, Fight Me IRL personified. And while fans were getting hyped for this announcement, around the same time, Kirito started acting very strange. It's been no secret that he had a bit of an ego. His fellow co-workers described him as someone who was drunk on their own talent. In fact, there was a recent Famitsu article where an inside source had this story to share. Back in the day, we'd often get a lot of fan mail, so much so that it was hard to keep up with it, but even then, it was a major confidence boost for us. We were all proud of the work we produced, Kirito-san especially. We'd often get game ideas sent in from time to time. It was nice to see how our games were inspiring our fans. For example, this one kid, let's call him M, would send us his ideas weekly, and quite honestly, if it wasn't for the limitations of the hardware at the time, we would have considered using them. Kirito, however, seemed to have taken a different reaction to them. Almost violent. It's as if he can't handle the idea that someone was as good of a designer, if not better, than he was. And worst of all, the ideas came from an ordinary child. A lot of us presumed Masamune gave him those letters specifically to humble him. But looking back on it now, it appears to have made him more unhinged. It was actually getting to the point where he started signing off his blog entries as the Game Master, or God. And this wasn't in a cheeky way either. The man literally thought he was God, a deity who was blessing us with his godly games. He would usually go on unhinged rants about how the player base aren't playing his games properly, even chastising the world record speedrunner of Tattle Quest for using exploits. But fans weren't deterred. If anything, it added to his likability, like a sort of Hideki Kamiya type figure. And with ego like that, everyone was eager to see his upcoming masterpiece. That's if he had the chance to finish it. On March 12, 2017, months after the release of Mighty Action X, Kirito Dan was arrested for biological terrorism. As it turns out, some of the copies of Mighty Action X, along with other games that launched alongside the Gamer Driver, had traces of an undisclosed virus. People were reporting flu-like symptoms and seizures after playing the game, and it became so common that the authorities began to take notice. Action wasn't taken until a whistleblower outed him with evidence of human experimentation. It looked as if he was trying to find a way to implement a penalty system in his upcoming game, going for a "if you die in the game, you die for real" type approach. Because of this, he was quickly put into quarantine and put through a thorough medical examination, of which they apparently discovered a portable system hidden up his rectum. Okay, look, this is a guy who claims he was God. You can't really be surprised by this. So, with the president of Genm being incarcerated, the company had to deal with the fallout and an unfinished game that they already poured a lot of money into. Stocks were dropping and investors were starting to get very nervous. So what did they do? The most sensible action was to cancel the project, or at least postpone it. But instead they, released it. Kamenrider Chronicle came out at the start of April with a development time of 6 months. This wasn't even an early access game. They put it out loud and proud, while making sure Kirito's name is nowhere near the end product. The issue with this was that Kirito was the only one with the knowledge of the source code. He didn't really trust anyone with his code, not even his fellow programmers. So the development team had to hack together a game in such short notice with whatever's lying around. Not even the design documents could help because they might as well be scribblings of a madman. I think even EA would gawk at this behaviour. However, much to the surprise of many, the base game was actually quite functional. Players could actually go outside and battle to their heart's content. Unfortunately, with it being in an unfinished state, players had a long list of complaints. Aside from balance issues, there were glitches such as the tutorial character being antagonistic towards new players, an exploit that allowed players to steal each other's weapons, level 99 players actually having the ability to fight level 5s right from the start of a match, death, NPCs jumping into battle to specifically target the weaker players, the tutorial character somehow going beyond her role and penalising players for rules that don't even exist. Many players also reported suffering from headaches and flu-like symptoms after playing the game, and by many I mean 90% of the player base. I also imported the game and it doesn't work. In hindsight, I pretty much dodged the bullet. A month after the launch of Chronicle, the founder and first president, Masamune Dan, was fully acquitted when news of Kirito's actions came to light. With the board being in desperate need of a leader, he gladly accepted the role as CEO of Genm once more. For his first action as president, Masamune made a statement apologising for the state of the game, and promised to fix things in the upcoming future. But if you were expecting a redemption story such as A Realm Reborn or No Man's Sky, you'll be sorely mistaken. If anything, he made it a lot worse. Instead, Masamune decided to butcher Kirito's vision further by adding microtransactions and time-limited events, one of them featuring a boss which was Kronos himself, who was literally unbeatable because he had the ability to stop time. Considering the game's unfinished state, players had no way of countering this skill, so they had no choice but to die. It was a no-win scenario that was made last minute to drum up the player base. And it worked! In the middle of all of this, he also started making plans to release it worldwide, with Tencent of all companies showing massive interest. The downside of all of this was, it led to a widespread pandemic, and once again the authorities had to step in. The health ministry even ordered Genm to stop production of the gamer driver. But before they could even prosecute Masamune, he straight up vanished. People assumed he just took the money and ran. The current theory is that he changed his name and became the famous J-pop star Takumi Hiroyuki. I mean, the resemblance is uncanny, but if you look at Takumi's career, that would imply that Masamune has broken out of prison on a regular basis to perform and then snuck back in after he was done with the concert. As funny as that can be, I find that a bit too far-fetched. But what about the star of this train wreck? Our resident genius, game master and local deity, Kirito Dan. Well, we don't know. The official record was that he passed away from the very virus that he was infecting people with, but as keen-eyed observers pointed out, there's been no registered death certificate or even a burial site. Considering what had happened, it doesn't come as much surprise that there might have been a lot of governmental red tape. The theories surrounding him are the most interesting, one of them being that he infected himself on purpose so they had no choice but to quarantine him, giving him enough time to think up an escape plan. It seemed very unlikely at the time until 2020 when eyewitnesses reported sightings of him. A couple of reports saying that they spotted him in a forest programming his next big game. In the nude.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
But I'd like to just chalk that up to rumours. As of now, Genm Corp appears to be under new management, with its biggest shareholder happening to be top Tekken player Nico Cyber. In her words, she wanted to save a company that has brought so much joy to her as a child. She even went as far as to spend her fortune, made from sponsorships and winnings, to keep the company afloat. So with a hardcore fan on the board, there'd totally be a good chance of them getting back the magic that put Genm Corp on the map. Maybe there'll still be a chance of them reviving the Mighty franchise. But unfortunately, that purchase was made years ago, and as of now it's April 1st, so I doubt any of that would come true. Bugger. The game is real, by the way. I might as well leave with some proper explanation. It was developed by 7th Chord and published by Bandai Namco. It was made as a tie-in for the Japanese superhero show Kamenrider Xaid. And I'm really impressed that they went out of their way to make an actual playable game for a bit of world building. If this was any other show, they would have either thrown in Call of Duty or, worse, resort to some cheap CGI. On top of the attention to detail, they managed to make a fun game with well thought out mechanics. The fact that I didn't encounter any glitches of the kind is a miracle too. When I titled this video The Best Platformer You Never Played, I was being somewhat genuine. I honestly believe that this was a really cool proof of concept that, if given the proper development time, I could see it being a bit of a cult classic. Back then, to get access to the game, you had to purchase a copy of 7th Chord's other game, All Kamenrider Rider Revolution, where it came with a code you can enter at the eShop. Only problem is no more eShop. Once again, Immolation came in to save the day, and helped me record footage of this game. It's a big shame that it's come to this, because I do think that there's something worth checking out here. Oh well. Oh, and yes, I'm afraid it is canon that a character happened to shove a console up there.